Coming up on the Health Feast.
If I were to look back, if I were to have a meter of my gratitude and being in that space of gratitude all the time, right? If there's a meter of like your gratitude level daily, I think I was more grateful for living in a fifth wheel trailer and having nothing and working 3 jobs than I do now, which is crazy to me because for me, it was just like someday I'm gonna keep working where I'm at, keep working at it, and at some point, I don't know how it's gonna manifest, but it's gonna manifest.
If I'm hearing you correctly, you were almost grateful for the future that didn't exist, but you knew you were gonna have.
Correct. And looking back, it's like, wow, like because I although I wanted to have a future where I'm at currently, I didn't realize how it was gonna happen. I didn't know how it was gonna happen, but the intention was there, right?
So you were telling yourself like that is something I'm going to have. That is something I'm going to achieve. So you're telling yourself that your brain's going to start looking for ways to make that happen.
To achieve it, right?
To achieve it. Okay, that's 1. 2, you reverberate a different wavelength of energy when you think that way, when you're grateful versus when you focus on what you don't have and your lack. And right, because so many people in that situation, they look at things they don't have and they focus on how they want those things, but also that they're like unhappy because they don't have those things. And it's that energy that then like either keeps you there in lack or
powerful,
puts you in a space where you're like,
I want to expand.
I want to expand. Hi, Po.
Good morning, Rak.
How you doing?
Good. Let's see here. Today, how's today going? Today is...
Yeah, you want to do a check-in?
Yeah.
Welcome to our listeners. Hello, all your listeners of the Health Feast. It's nice to see all of you. I mean, we can't see you.
Welcome.
We can't see you.
I'm excited to talk about this topic. I think today's topic, what you mentioned, was something like, it's good to have a check-in with that as well. So
right. Today, I thought we'd talk about gratitude. Gratitude. Yeah.
As far as gratitude goes, with that in mind, I think today is a little bit, I always say busy. Are we never ever busy? Are we always busy? Is it my mind that's always busy? I don't know.
That's the question, Po. Are you busy, or is it your mind that's busy?
That's a good something
question
that I got to reflect on. Had a little meeting with a financial person about some of my finances, which is something that causes a lot of stress for me. I know I mentioned that to you. And I feel good about that conversation because I feel like I have a tool that will be able to help me manage that stress. So as far as that goes, I feel excited about learning about these tools, to manage stress, because part of our conversations in Health Feast is like managing your stress levels, right? And for me,
that's right.
Finances is such a big like stressor for me, amongst other stressors, but that's one of the bigger ones. And that's the fact that I actually shared this with the gentleman that I was talking to. He was like, I was telling him like, the fact that there's a tool that you can just put your numbers in and it calculates for you versus me I don't know who does finances in your house, but I'm the one that's in charge of that. So like at the end of the month, I'm getting all my stuff, all the statements out, and that causes stress. That I feel like that for me, that causes a big stress. And so anyways, as far as this morning goes, I feel hopeful. I feel good. I wanted to get a workout in before our conversation, but I was in that last call for, quite some time. So I think you mentioned that you went for a run today. So that kind of is encouraging to me to maybe get some movement in after our call. So, but I'm feeling good today.
Good, man. It's
what
good
about
to hear.
you?
Well, first let me just say I'm always grateful and excited to be here with you. So that, Monday mornings, we do this on Monday mornings, and Monday mornings used to be like Sunday nights. I'd be like dreading the weekend ending. And then Monday mornings would be like the start of the week.
Yeah.
So many things happening. And yeah, it was a lot. It was really stressful and busy. Now I with my new job, I'm able to work like Monday afternoon to Monday evening. That's been interesting. That I can like have some more flexibility and shift some of my hours to later in the day. So Monday morning, I wake up, I take the kids to school, and I take the kids to school every day now. So
That's
I
awesome. How's that going for you?
well, that's why I thought of this episode actually. So this morning I was driving to school and I was like, what should we talk about today? What should we talk about today? And one of the things we do on the way to school every day is we all go around and do a check-in. And our check-in, me and the three kids, right? And our check-in involves two questions. One is, what are you excited about for today?
Mm-hmm.
So we really like frame the day and thinking about like what are all the exciting things, adventures, like things we get to see or learn today, and pick one. And then I was excited about this. And then that made me realize, wow, yeah, you're excited about Monday mornings. Like Sunday night, there's almost like this anticipation of Monday morning now, as opposed to this dread.
Yeah.
So that was really cool to acknowledge. And then the other thing we ask each other is, what's one thing you're grateful for? And my rule is, it's a rule, is it has to be something specific from the last 24 hours. So you could, you can't say like your brother, you could be grateful for him, but why are you grateful for him? Oh, he made breakfast this morning. He did. He like toasted bagels and for everyone, because we're all running late in the morning, so they eat in the car now. So that's become our routine while we're going to school. So they're chomping on bagels that my son put together. Anyway, so that's why I thought, what are we going to do the episode about? And the gratitude practice that we do together in the car made me think that would be a really good thing to talk about. And there's so much science behind gratitude and like how it supports health and well-being, and it feels really good. And a lot of people don't do it because maybe they haven't thought about how to implement it in their life. So I thought we could share like our own, well, that's my example, but later you can share your examples and we can sort of brainstorm more ways in which people could start a small gratitude practice. Like why would you want to do it? What is it, and what are the ways you do it? And then like, how does someone actually implement it in their life? What does that look like? That's how I thought we'd talk about it.
I appreciate this topic very much. I think that's awesome. I think I'm going to start practicing that with my kids. Just the thought that you shared that with your own kids. I think that's a beautiful thing to do, especially in the morning, right? Before they go to school.
Yeah.
Just get their minds thinking about that. And you start off you start your day off. I feel like that kind of projects like peace when you go to school because you're thinking about what you're grateful for walking into school. And I mean, I think as adults going to work, I think that's something that we should also practice because, I'm sure there's people that don't necessarily like, where they choose to go spend time to make money, but to be grateful for that job or for that, that way that you make money is such a great topic. And you know what? I didn't even think about that topic. It was something that we talked. And for those who don't know, especially our audience, like our discussions are always like about very interesting topics. And a lot of times we don't really have any plans for some of our conversation pieces. We just go, let's talk about gratitude. And then we just run with it. So, but if you want to comment certain topics that those of you who do listen want us to talk about, feel free to
please
leave it in the comment or email Dr. Rak. or somewhere, let us know, and
Well, so
we'll
they can go
we'll
to our yeah, no, Poe, that's a good point. They can go to our website, thehealthfeast.com, thehealthfeast.com. And then there's a little box where you can leave a question or a comment for
yeah.
us. But I got a comment from someone the other day, gentleman by the name of Daryl Moon, who runs an organization or a website called Aspirational Healthcare. Aspirational Healthcare. And I won't get into too much. I will say I'm meeting with him again this week. I met with him briefly last week because of that outreach on the website. But he is working towards creating a new system of healthcare, and he's basing it off of I won't say too much. He's going to be a guest on our show, but he's basing it off of a system in Alaska, actually, that is centered around relationships. It's centered around having strong relationships with your doctor, with your, all the people involved in your care team, just like we've talked about in this show
Yeah.
before, and we've described it. And so, actually, that's how he found out about it. So I put up a clip on LinkedIn, and one of the hashtags I put was aspirational healthcare. And he found it through that. And when he listened to the clip, he said that is exactly what this group in Alaska has implemented, and what he's now working with like employer groups to set up kind of systems of health care and health insurance and health coverage for their employees in a way that might emphasize these types of relationships more.
I look forward to having him on the feast. I look forward to that. That'd be the interesting conversation to have.
Okay, that was an aside. We were talking about gratitude. Oh yeah, yes. But you brought out, yeah, you brought up. If anyone wants to leave us a comment or a question, yeah, you can visit us at thehealthfeast.com, and there's a little place to put it right there. Okay, so gratitude. So, well, let me back up. Do you have a regular gratitude practice, Poe?
Do I have a regular gratitude practice right
Like,
now? Go ahead.
yeah, like what does that mean when I say that? Even regular gratitude practice.
I
What does
would
that mean to
just
you?
say, to me, after you like, first thing comes to my mind is, do I practice gratitude at any point in my day, from when I wake up until when I go to sleep? Is there something? I would say no.
Yeah, are
Um,
you intentional about it? That's right.
Correct.
Not that you don't
Right.
have that you're not grateful. You're a
Right.
very grateful person. Many people are, but is there an intentional time you set aside? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And when I think about it, I don't. I don't. Now, it's not to say that when I'm driving to work and I'm thinking about stuff, I do think about things that I'm grateful for. I had an interesting conversation with another buddy of mine. He's a DJ. This was a few days ago, and this was a moment where it made me feel grateful because he was like, I asked him how he was doing, and the first thing he said to me was, "Oh man, you know what? I'm having a good day. Just first world problems. You know what I mean?" So, and it's like his perspective. Is like um, there's people that are getting bombed on, and you know what I mean. Like those are good moments for him where he's just like wanting to move. That's all he wanted to do. So, and
Yeah.
that got me to start thinking like, yeah, it's funny. He said that, and it kind of initiated this thought process in my mind. Like, man, it's almost like you're like, oh yeah, that's right. It's not that bad. My life isn't
Yeah.
that bad. Sometimes I feel like my life is that bad, or I can be ungrateful. But you know what? Like, it's funny because it's as simple as I've heard this growing up. You have a roof over your head and food to eat and clothes on your back. You know, um,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I think of when you say, if I have a practice? No, but I have moments in my day that I feel grateful or I have gratitude for certain
Yeah.
things.
It sounds like, and that happens regularly for you.
Yes,
Like you would say most days you have a reflection like that.
I would say yes. It's
Yeah.
not intentional though. Like it's thoughts that come through my mind when, you know,
Yeah.
like, when you have a nicer car. I remember having a car that wasn't as nice. And so I'm
Hmm.
like, man, I'm so grateful for having this nice car, or a house. There was a time when we didn't have a house. We were
Yeah.
literally in a fifth wheel trailer, you
Yeah.
know?
Wow.
And so do I go around say, I mean, I do think about it throughout my day, but I can't say it's intentional. So yeah.
Well, I wonder. I mean, we can talk about that. The intentionality piece, and why I think that's um, potentially important. But in your case, it sounds like you sort of have this baseline level of gratitude, like, that permeates your thoughts, and you regularly visit or think about things that you're grateful for, or you sort of reflect on perspective, like you said, perspective on
Yeah.
where you've come from, and where you are.
So my grandfather, I wanted to say this piece too, because I think the reason why I feel like I'm always in a space of gratitude, not
Hmm.
conscious, like sometimes in a subconscious mind, but not so much my conscious mind, is because growing up, my grandfather, we used to always have prayers. My grandfather was a pastor and Christian based faith, but we would always have prayers in the evening every day in the islands growing up.
Hmm.
And when you speak about gratitude in the prayers, I remember when we would all be praying, he would talk about the things that he was grateful for in his
Hmm.
prayers. But
Hmm.
because it's the whole family. Those who are Pacific Islander descent, they know what I'm talking about. It's like prayer time, and it was like an hour long before the sunset. We would all sit down on the ground and we would just pray. And my grandfather would always be the lead of the prayer,
Hmm.
and those who wanted to pray out loud could pray out loud. But I just remember my grandfather being the one that would always be the first to initiate. And in his prayers, he would
Hmm.
just be talking about how grateful for what he had in his life, and he would just name specifically like things that he was grateful for. And I think when you're
Hmm.
exposed to that at such a young age, and you come from very humble beginnings, you always sort of have that perspective of like, man, it could be worse. And even till this day, and I'm sure, yeah, till this day, the things that I take for granted here, like having hot water here in the
Hmm.
mainland, in the islands, the hot water goes out or the water
Hmm.
goes out. And so,
Hmm.
we laugh about it now because, like that's how it was. But like, you'd have to get a bucket of water and that's how you would bathe and that's how you do your
Hmm.
laundry. Those
Hmm.
are the things. And I got to experience that as a kid. So that's another thing I would have to add is that being in that environment where you don't really have a lot and there's a lot of people,
Hmm.
you kind of appreciate the luxuries that you have here today. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not a perfect person, like there's times when I'm just like completely like, uh, forget about those things. But I think when I am in that space of gratitude, I really do go back to those times and I think about all those things, because I think I tend to forget about those things when I'm up against something that's like, I feel like it's like, oh my gosh, it's I can't believe this is happening. And then, to remember like how far, I have come when it comes to the things
Hmm.
that I've manifested in my life today,
Hmm.
on this day. Um,
Hmm.
I'm pretty, yeah. I mean, it's hard to imagine not to be grateful if you've come from any kind of challenged upbringing.
Well, that's interesting, Poe. First of all, like, you said something that stuck out to me. You said you sort of live in this space of gratitude,
Yeah.
and I think the intentionality piece is more important when people don't live in that space. The intentionality piece is actually to help you kind of live more in that space.
Mm.
So if you live in a space where you're constantly looking at what's wrong or what's lacking, then think about the emotions that creates, first of all, within you. and think about then like how that, affects interactions. I mean, the opposite is true, right? So I'm not going to say that I don't live in a space of gratitude. I think I've been more intentional about it to kind of pull myself in that direction, but I can think of time. I can think of times, you know, when I haven't been living in that space for sure.
Mm.
For sure. And where I was very negative, there's a lot of negativity. I shared this with you. I shared this with our guests in our second episode was, I would come home from work and I was always complaining. I was always like all the things that were kind of upsetting for me throughout the day, or all the things that, and that's when my wife told me that we don't like that energy. Like that energy doesn't feel good for us. And one of my first experiences that sort of changed was when I went to this physician wellness session in the evening, and they had us pull out our phone and they said, just send a text message to somebody who you appreciate, that you work with. Okay. And I texted my colleague at the time, is in the office with me. We shared an office together with two other people, it's kind of small office. And I texted one of them. His name's Ray. And Ray is this incredible, I would say, gifted human being, just so compassionate and empathetic, and, older than me. In fact, he just retired. Uh, he just retired last year. And so when I joined the department in the hospital medicine department, he was like my go-to. I would ask him questions, and he has three kids. And I was, starting to have kids. I had one, and then two, and then three. And so he would be my go-to for like parenting advice, and he became this sort of like mentor and friend at the same time. And so, and how amazing is it when you're young in your career to have someone like that,
Yeah.
like who I just knew, like even if he wasn't at work, I could text him if I had a question about something. Like it gave me a lot of, so I don't remember exactly what I wrote, but I wrote something just quickly when they asked us to, about how I appreciated him, how it was really like amazing to have an office with someone who I consider a friend, and sent it. Okay. And then they had to put our phones away. And then they asked us, how do you feel? How do you feel right now compared to how you felt before you did that? And that was like a light bulb moment for me, because I was like, I feel better. I feel like way better. Like just going through that whole experience of thinking about all the reasons I appreciate him and then sending that message made me feel better. And that kind of, as I talked about in our interview, like when you interviewed me, I said, I didn't know happiness was a choice. I didn't believe that actually. And then I had that experience. So to me, a fundamental, and this is like goes back to the health feast, is anything starts with a place where actually, wow, it makes you feel good. It's not even, we can go through like some of the science of gratitude. Gratitude supports health and well-being in all these really interesting ways. But I think the most important thing I learned was that when you focus on negative, when you focus on lack, like that creates this certain energy and emotion within you, and then that's what you put out. And then when you focus on gratitude and what you have, and what, what you said, where you've come from, and the perspective of knowing what you have, um, in context of what you didn't have, and just be feeling so appreciative for it. Think about, the energy and emotion it creates within you, and then think about the person you are, because of that. You said it in, when I said, what a great way for my children to start the day, because it creates that energy for the day. And I didn't even think about that we do it in the morning, but you're right. You're absolutely right. So anyway, that is that is why I started doing it, because of that experience. And then realizing that it feels good. And I've had different iterations, but anyway, I want to hear your thoughts on that.
No, I think I'm just trying to think of like how because there are times when I'm it's being consistent with that, right? It's like sort of every single day practicing gratitude because
That's
because the day is not, it's things are happening. The sensories
right.
are always happening.
Right.
Conversation with your wife,
Right.
conversation with a friend, someone
Right.
cut you off when
Right.
you're parking or when you're driving to work.
Right.
So there's all these things that are happening that 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 are trying to either remove you from that space,
Mm.
right? But I have been in a space where if you're like, and I don't know what it was then. I don't know if it was just more introspective. Like I'm always in this state of like thinking about stuff, but I've been in spaces where you feel like you're almost like at one with everything else around you.
Mm.
And so when things happen, they don't trigger you or they don't pull from you. You know what I mean? They don't pull from that space. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. When did you experience that?
Oh man, this was like 10 years ago, right? I did some personal development work and I felt like that. I felt like I was one amongst many. And no matter what someone will do, it didn't matter because it wasn't going to deter me from that space. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, I don't know. It's been a long time, and I find that
Well,
I still
so
try to get to that space.
I think that's where the intentionality also comes into play. So it's kind of like your brain picks out things that you tell it are important. Like we have a part of our brain that actually, right, if you're or thinks that are important. So if you're in a crowded room and someone yells your name, even if there's lots of people talking, like you'll hear your name. Your brain actually is like is looking out for things that it thinks are important. And it's like, how do we interpret all the information that's coming in and then
Mm,
decide what to focus on? If you buy a new car, if you buy it doesn't matter new or used, but it's new to you, you'll start seeing models of that car everywhere.
right.
And even if it's not a very common car, like you'll start picking it out because your brain sort of is like, oh, that's important. I'm going to focus on that. It just sort of happens. I'd say gratitude is the same idea, or just sort of that mindset is, if you're intentional about focusing on, I tell this to my kids. I say, if you're intentional about focusing on something you're grateful for, maybe one thing, two things, three things, got to start somewhere. But then it almost like helps you as you go through the day. You start to have these new lenses. That's what I say,
Hmm.
the gratitude lens, because even it prompts you sometimes to think like, oh, maybe that's something I'm going to reflect on. Like when something happens, you notice it in the moment more because you've become accustomed to practicing. And the way it was described to me, when I tell my kids to do this too, is if they can't think of something, because initially I asked the question, something you're grateful for from the last 24 hours. And if you can't think of something, I say, start with this morning, start with this moment right now and run it in rewind like a movie. You're just watching it in rewind. And very quickly because I remember like a year ago or a year and a half ago when we started this practice, and one day my daughter said, there's nothing, I can't, or my son, there will always be days where one of them would say and I would say, let's start from this moment and run run it and rewind, and then we just very quickly be able to pick out any number of things from that morning and then the night before and then the so then you get it's almost like you get better at
Mm.
noticing these things and appreciating these things. That's why when you said you live in a space of gratitude, I said the intentionality is sort of like get you there, because then the intent, the space is almost like that, the gratitude lens, like the way in which you perceive things. You can perceive things as like the victim and
Mm.
what you don't have, or you can perceive things in terms of like how grateful you are.
I mean, for me, I think of like monks,
Hmm.
like some type of, and I'm sure, and I don't know what, I just think of people that are in that space, like, that are so like, they're always at peace, and and they spend their whole lives like in that practice, in that space. Buddhist monks that
Mm-hmm.
practice certain, they will meditate on certain ways of being, and like gratitude is one way of being that they will spend. Some monks will spend their whole life practicing a gratitude, um, and so I would assume like that would be, you know could you imagine though, like if like you dedicate your whole life to practicing gratitude.
Hmm. It reminds me of I use this meditation app sometimes. It's called Fit Mind. The guy who started it, super interesting guy, and he's like a monk now. He like has become a monk. And anyway, it's a mental fitness training app. So that's why it's called Fit Mind. But it's centered around like meditation as this mental fitness app. And he makes
Mm.
the point actually that, you know, in not too distant future, like we'll wonder why, everybody focuses on physical, so many people, not everybody, but a lot of people focus on their physical fitness, right?
Hmm.
Absolutely. Like, and they think about exercise, and there is some like mental fitness that goes along with that. Like it improves your mental fitness, but um, in Fit Mind, the whole idea is that you're actually intentional about your mental fitness. So you do these meditations, certain meditations, and he has so many different practices. But one of them that I thought of was it's a whole meditation centered around wanting what you have, like
Oh wow.
desiring what you already have. I mean, it's a really cool too, because it makes me think of what you said, Poe, because then you start thinking about how you didn't have these things, and it could be anything. It could be a relationship. It could be anything. It could be like just your abilities in life. That's a cool concept, right? Is just to what you said, like these monks are living in a space where they're constantly just sort of feeling grateful. They're reflecting on it. There's an intentionality in that as well, like in their meditations. They must be focusing a lot of attention on gratitude.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just like, as you're talking, I'm just trying to reflect. Like, so let me ask you this: what would be something that you're grateful for? Let's just talk about things in our
Hmm.
life that we're completely grateful for.
Hmm.
That's a challenge, possibly. That it's
Hmm.
hard. It's the hard part of to be grateful. But because sometimes I feel
Hmm.
like that. Sometimes I feel like, man, like I am grateful, but man, when I'm not there yet. And I think it's really interesting that what you're saying is like thinking of what is not.
Yeah.
Why don't you think of what you do have? And I find like that to be, because I think I've experienced what it's like to be not grateful, and that's part of human emotion too. Sometimes you're not. I'm in a space where I forget to be grateful. Because the intention is to be grateful all the time. But I think I've experienced bouts, certain times in my life where I'm just completely feel like, man, there's nothing that's going to make me feel like not grateful for something, you know? And I feel like this, like I was saying earlier, it's like your whole life is you're living your life, um, staying in that space. And if you have people that are dedicating their lives to it, that's like a crazy concept of like dedicating your whole life into praying and meditating about being
Yeah.
grateful.
Well, I think in Buddhism, like in similar to Hinduism, that there's this appreciation for the interconnectedness of
Mm,
all beings. I don't know. It's almost like there's a gratitude that develops from knowing that there's this higher energy and this interconnectedness. I feel that a lot. Do you know what I'm talking about?
yeah, yeah,
I feel that gives me like sort of, I'll just say it. I just feel that's how I like feel connected to you,
yeah.
and there's this gratitude in our connection, but also just this knowing that we're connected on this higher level. I don't know.
Yeah, I hear that because I do believe that you come across people in your life all the time, every day. I mean, you're driving next to people, right? But I think when you are connected with somebody, like on a level that you're like, man, I don't know what it is yet, but we're gonna figure it out. But like you want to seize the moment, and we always talk about this, like we don't know where this is gonna go, but
Hmm.
it feels right, right? Like we're
Yeah.
talking about things that matter to both of us, right? And I think that's how the health feast came to be, was because we felt like, man, this is something that we both value and that we both share, and I think we should just start talking about it. And but I mean, can you think of any other, well, besides like, well, like meeting your significant other, like meeting your wife,
Oh
like,
yeah. Oh, can I think of specific? Oh yeah. I mean, there's so many things I'm grateful for in my life. Oh my God. I mean, where to start? But if like, I'll just run through the movie for the last 24 hours, right? So like, before, I'm grateful that I'm able to do that now every day, drop my kids off at school. Like, I have the flexibility in my work and my job, because I didn't have that for many years. I worked 2 weekends a month for over a decade, and my kids were small. They're still pretty young, but that was really that was a lot on my wife. First of all, I know that, and I was feel like I was missing, now that I like am at home on the weekends. Like, I feel like I was missing a lot. And it's not to say that like some people in their jobs have to work weekends. I'm not saying like I didn't make the most of it when it was happening, but to now reflect like, wow, I get so much time with my children. Like, and I've been intentional about that. Like, that I realized was something that I really wanted in my life. I wanted more time with my children. So then when I was seeking out and thinking about like what I might do for work and like what would work for our family and these types of things, like, I'm so grateful that I'm in a place where, I mean, so many things. Like, I'm grateful that the work I do now is so aligned with my values and my purpose. There were many times, I would tell you, like, I'd be driving into work during the pandemic, like to the hospital, and just feeling like so overwhelmed and stressed, like a lot of the time, but knowing that feel, I couldn't let myself like be consumed by that. So I would listen to this. I somehow, like, on YouTube, I heard this like spiritual recording one day. It was a spiritual recording from this. His name's Muji. Have you ever heard of this guy?
no.
Mooji. Mooji. I'm not like a follower of him, but I there was a period of time where I would listen to his recordings like every day going to work, every single day. Because what does he talk about? He talks about like the interconnectedness of all beings. he talks about like there is no I, right? There's like our awareness, which is part of this bigger consciousness, and then there's ego, which kind of keeps us kind of centered around the physical being. Eckhart Tolle is
Yeah, it talks about
similarly
that.
talks about this, and I read A New Earth, his book A New Earth, around that time too. Yeah, it was just around that time too. So that was also very helpful for me to just recognize that like these my physical body and my experience right now is going through a lot of really hard things, but I had to just remind myself. And then I would also remind myself, Poe, like I would say things to myself like, how many lives am I going to change today? Like, because knowing I would go into the hospital and I was going to be taking care of people, I had to remind myself, like, I couldn't just focus on what was really hard and stressful. I had to focus on what was possible and what I was doing and how I was serving, and I just had to be very intentional about focusing on that. So I would listen. I would say it was it was Muji to work. I said it to myself in the morning. I said Muji to work, and I would find some recording, like because I had a 30 or sometimes 45 minute commute. That was also stressful. I was like taking 101 and everything about it was just
Yeah.
stressful. And I would just listen to these recordings and I would feel so much better by the time I got to work. Like I don't know, just this like peace and calm, just knowing like it's for, and this, just reminding myself of things like nothing in life is constant. What you're experiencing now is not going to be forever. And I just took a lot of like,
Mm.
and then like and then focusing on like all the things that were really good. Like we were in the middle of a pandemic and I had a very good job and I got to go in and see people every day, like physically see people. My wife was home with our kids every day. She was like working from home or trying to work from home while they were trying to do virtual school. And I got to go see my colleagues every day, like have these physical interactions. Not every day, but the days I was working. And you can imagine like how normalizing that is. So many people were isolated and were experiencing the toll of that. And and so I would focus on that. I'd be like, wow, I get to go see friends every day because that's how I look at my colleagues. That's how I relate to my colleagues, as I try to, as friends. Because then I realized that after that text message, I said, wow, if I start just connecting with everyone, I'm going to be like so much more. I'm going to look forward to going to work so much more if I recognize like if I just start like being friends with everyone, then it's like, oh, you get to work with your friends. Like that's, so I did all these things intentionally because I didn't want to go back to a place where I was just feeling like a victim and trapped and miserable, and
Mm.
you know that it wouldn't, and I
Serve
did
you.
go, it wouldn't serve me. I did go through a period of the pandemic, but I noticed it pretty quickly. My daughter and kids kind of noticed it too, that I was sort of going down this darker hole, and then quickly I realized that's not, I don't want to experience that this way. Gratitude was really like, if I think about
It,
it
it,
was the
it,
thing that saved me from going down that path again.
and sometimes gratitude doesn't happen in the moment. Sometimes it happens after,
Oh, absolutely.
right? Because like great for you that you were able to be in that space. I didn't have the same experience during the pandemic, and without going into too much detail, but yeah, I was really resentful because I was, you know, I was worried about my family. I'm a big family person, and for me, I was like, man, I signed up for this, but my kids didn't sign up. My wife didn't sign up. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I should say my wife does work in the medical field, but my kids didn't sign up, and that was something that, and I had no power over that, and I definitely went into that victim mentality during that time. But in looking back, right, I can honestly say I'm very 100% grateful to some extent because I had I had means. Like I was still able to
Mm,
provide for my family. Like to me, that's what it boiled down to was like, man, there's a lot of people that lost their jobs and couldn't go to work. And yeah, they were getting, help from the government, but it wasn't, some of it wasn't enough for some people and they lost. Um, so like for me, like thinking back, it's like, man, it could have went a different direction. Um, and then to put it in gratitude, I'm definitely grateful for that. I think the other thing too is that it made me look at my coworkers different because a lot of us were showing up and people were getting sick left and right, and we didn't have the
mm,
proper equipment, safety equipment
mm,
to help us in our jobs. So there was a lot of stuff behind that like in looking back, I was like, man, that was a really tough situation. And I had I gained a lot of respect for the people that I work with because we were all sort of like in the trenches dealing with this, pandemic, not knowing what was going on, losing coworkers,
mm.
um, and so yeah, I mean, when I look back now, I can see what I'm grateful for. Um, because neither of us were able to stay home with the kids. We both, we had friends help us out with our little one, but
Right. Right.
um, it was an interesting time. I'm still trying to, unravel that whole, I don't know, 2 years, 2.5 years. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that's trying to unpack that situation. But in looking back now, it's like, yeah, I'm definitely grateful for I'm glad my family, we didn't lose anybody in my family
Mm,
because of the pandemic. So, there's stuff like that it's like, man, like we were talking about the lens, how I choose to look at the narrative that I think about that is in a space of gratitude is different now than it was
yeah.
in the moment, you know, because that whole thing was I'm sure it was for you guys, and for you to be able to be in that space during that thing is a tribute to who you are as a person, you know. But
Well, I needed help. I needed help. That's why I said what is the help I can, I listen to these
yeah,
recordings every day because I listen to these recordings every day. I'll do some meditation. I'll I'll do what I can to control what I can in my
right,
mind because there's so much out of our control. That was
yeah,
my big takeaway, and I think that's true. So many
for,
people in life, they get frustrated, upset because from things that are outside of their control
right,
rather than focusing what is under your control. And that's, I bring it back to gratitude. Like gratitude is something that you have control over. Like you have control over emphasizing
yes, yeah,
things that that you value, that you appreciate. I'll give you an example for one way gratitude has really helped me in a practical way. Also during the pandemic, I mean, I have a history of depression. I've shared that with you, and I think shared this on the podcast. And there were these big ups and downs, right? A lot of downs during the pandemic, and I'll be honest, it really strains my relationship with my wife. Like,
mm,
I don't know if she would say it in that way, but I notice when my depressive symptoms are worse, like it's just hard for her. I also become more withdrawn. So I become less helpful at home and these types of things. And so this was happening certainly during the pandemic, especially like the first 6 months off and on. I
mm,
would go through these periods despite everything I was doing, right? Despite like making sure I was trying to listen to these recordings and exercise and this and that, but it was, it was a recognition that maybe we need. Then I would sort of get resentful. I'd be like, well, why are you,
yeah,
I'd be like, why are you upset at me for something like I'm dealing, like you should be sympathetic and like, and one thing we realized, we didn't know it at the time, was that we didn't really have a good way of communicating with each other. Like our communication would often result from like feeling negative emotions and then wanting to speak about it, as opposed to like having a way in which we could communicate with each other without judgment, and where we could really like feel like the other person could feel heard and listened to. And so we underwent some counseling, like couples therapy. We got a recommendation for a therapist through a friend, and it was virtual during the pandemic. And that's what we learned. We learned a system of communicating with each other. And the first way that we learned about it, like, was through through sharing appreciation with each other. Like that's how we would practice it on the calls,
Yeah.
is we would share appreciations with each other. And so it's a dialogue. And so one person is the sender and one person is the receiver. And when you're sending, um, you say whatever you want to say, and then the receiver, they repeat back what they heard. Like they summarize what they heard. That's it. They don't give any opinion on it. They just sort of summarize what they heard. So for example, Po, if I was sending, I would say, Po, I just want to tell you, I really appreciate how, how vulnerable you can be in sharing that with other people. And I think that's really powerful. And I've told you that before. And then you would say, I hear that you really appreciate that I'm vulnerable, and and then you would ask me, is there more? And then I might share something else.
Mm.
And then there's another piece to it, which is like, after I'm done, there's this summarizing piece where you sort of like summarize like what you heard, and then how it must make me feel, to say these things. That's an interesting part of it. Okay. So this is a whole dialogue. It's called Imago. And we learned that and we would practice that. It's really cool that we started with the appreciation, because it feels good, and because later you can then use that same dialogue to talk about things that are upsetting to you. And it creates a space where you can share everything that's on your mind and know that the other person will just hear you and listen, and then they get a chance to then do it. So you switch roles after that.
Right.
So
That's pretty cool.
yeah. Yeah, and the
I
appreciation piece, that's why I brought it up, because the appreciation piece, we still use this dialogue method, but we use the appreciation piece all the time. And I just, to this morning, my wife got up before anyone else, and she, like, because last night we were both really tired, and I cleaned up the kitchen kind of, but there were so many dishes, and she got up early this morning and she did the dishes. And that's the first thing I said. Can I send you an appreciation? And then I said, I really appreciate that you got up early and you did the dishes. And then she said, I hear that you really appreciate that I cleaned up the kitchen. And
That's
we do
awesome, Rock.
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell you right now, like from I've been married 16 years, and we've done some couples therapy years ago. We haven't gone back in some time, but I think that's really cool that you still practice that with your wife, man. Really, like, and
Well,
like I said,
we only started a couple of years ago, but then we taught our kids.
Still, like, you guys are
kids
still
do it.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, man.
Still do it. Still do it, because I want to actually invite. We don't work. We stopped the therapy because we felt like we learned the communication method,
the tools and stuff.
The tools and stuff. And but I would love to invite her on. That my wife thinks it's a great idea to invite her on to talk about.
Let's do it. I think that's a great idea too. Because I think not only for myself, but I'm sure for our listeners, to have that relationship with your wife, it's a big part of your life. Like, it's a big part of my life. And I'm not. I always say like I have faults and vices, and I'm not perfect, but I am definitely somebody who's always striving to work on what I need to improve within myself, so that because whatever I am, I'm bringing to the table with my wife, and
That's right.
whatever she's dealing with, she's bringing to the table. So, and on top of that, we're teaching our kids how to be in relationships when they get older,
That's right.
So,
They're observing you. They're
oh
constantly
yeah,
observing you.
right.
Yeah.
And I just want to like acknowledge that about you, man. I feel like that's something really cool that you guys are be able to, you know, um, utilize those tools. And I aspire to do the same thing. Like now I've got my wheels are turning like, okay, how do I, incorporate this, and how do I, get my wife into it as well.
Mm.
And then eventually, cause we've done something similar years ago, but it wasn't the same, it was a little bit different. But what I'm learning though is that just like everything we talk about, man, it's a practice. Like you have to be
Yeah.
intentional about,
You have to be intentional
get
about
clear about what you want, and
and then do
practice
a
it.
little bit. Do a little bit.
Yeah.
With my wife and I, like that was we had to like become intentional about scheduling time to talk, right?
Hmm.
So you can learn these tools, but then if you go the whole week without having intentional time to talk, then we realized that like the same thing happens. Like you start, because if you don't talk and communicate, what happens? You start coming up with your own stories of what the
Mm.
other person is thinking, of why they're
100%.
doing
Yeah.
what they're doing. Here's what I learned. My stories are always wrong. And the intent, usually the intent is good on both
Yeah.
sides. For my wife, for me, the intent is good. And so we need to create a space where we can share our intentions, because when we share our intentions, then our any feelings of uh, feeling upset or angry go away. You know?
Yeah. I actually, a friend of mine told me about a book. I'm trying to tell you the name of it, but it's, something about the love language or something. My wife started reading. I haven't read it yet,
Oh, the
but I don't know
five
if
love languages.
is that what it's called. Hold on, I think
Um,
that's what it's called. The five, yes, the five love languages. Yes, yes.
yeah.
I
Okay.
haven't read it yet, but my a friend of mine told me about it. He's like, man, you should read it with your wife. So I got it on Amazon. It came, and my wife, I had it on the counter, and I think my wife picked it up. And I asked her how, she seems to be getting a lot from it though. I could tell.
Oh, is she reading it?
Yeah, she's reading it right now.
Um.
It's by what's the gentleman's
Yeah.
name?
What are the Yeah, it's Gary Chapman.
Gary Chapman.
Fi-
Yeah.
we should talk about that sometime. There's five different. I know my wife and I have talked about this. Our love languages are different.
Right.
Right.
I think
So
everybody has their own their own style
yeah.
language. I don't know anything about the book though, so I can't speak from the book, but it makes sense to me, right? Because I've talked to my wife about this. Like,
Yeah.
I like how you said the story that you have about whatever, how you interpret what she's
Yeah.
doing is always wrong, right?
Yeah.
And I can relate to that because a lot of times our arguments are based off of what she's assuming that I'm thinking
Yeah.
or that I'm doing.
That's
And then
it.
I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, so I think she also read a book years ago. My wife read a book called Men Are From, or Women Are From Venus, Men Are From Mars, or some book. I
Sure.
don't know. I don't know the name of the author of that book, but I know that was a book that she read years ago. So, but anyways, I say that to say that that makes a lot of sense. Like, that we definitely our intentions are always, my intentions are always good, but it could be misinterpreted by my other
Yeah.
half as
There's a
something.
real. We're talking about books now. There's a really good book that I feel. It's like a kind of animated book too. Like they draw cartoons.
Oh,
It's called Stop the Fight, and it's basically this, like the 12 most common arguments that couples get into, and the author goes through, like, I can't remember who the author is, but Michelle Brody, but the
Michelle
author
Brody.
goes through, yeah, like what the what the intention, how the intention is always different than the what the person perceives. And that's where that's where the argument comes. It's always when the intention isn't received, it's miscommunicated through the action or through the words or whatever. Like the fight comes because the intention is misconstrued. Like that in general, like couples who love each other, they actually have good intentions for each other, for themselves and for each other. Sometimes it's that they're not aware. Oftentimes it's that they're not aware of how their intention is being received, and then this is where the fight comes. So what was game changing for my wife and me, which we didn't even realize it initially, we were like, we need a therapist, right? We need someone to help our relationship. But actually we got so lucky in that we learned a tool to communicate with each other, because that was what was underlying so much of our unhappiness or our arguments or whatever, was that we had miscommunicated intentions. And so having a method to communicate with each other, which it comes from a school of, I don't know if you ever heard of what's called nonviolent communication, maybe at work, like you had workshops on this.
Yeah.
It's the idea that you can say something with psychological safety, that you're not going to work, like, I'll be honest, like in the past, my wife would have worried if she said something that I would react, right? That I would get defensive or upset, and so part of this process was going into this kind of situation, or this creating the space where it was like, I can hear you, and I can hear you without judgment. I can just hear you and know what you're saying is true for you in this moment. That's it. Because when we're listening to someone, we're often thinking, like, that's when our like alarms are going up, right? Like, why is what they're saying wrong?
Right.
Why is it not
the defense mechanism is
why is it not in congruence with what I believe, the story that I believe? And so you have to remove yourself from that narrative and just listen to what the other person is saying. And the fact that you're going to reflect back means like you know.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's talk. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to tie that back. I was just going to tie that back to gratitude. Like,
yes.
I was just trying to bring it back to, because we're definitely going off on like
a tangent.
Yeah.
But I brought that up because of, that gratitude, like, has definitely helped. Just showing appreciation with my wife on a regular basis, not just my wife, with my kids. I'll tell you, one of the things I say, Po, that I'm grateful for, like in the morning, is like when my middle son especially, helps put the breakfast together for the kids. And this morning, I came down late to make the lunches. I came down like 15 minutes late, and he had already made the breakfast, and he already started, right? It's like the fact that not just me, like my daughter and my other son will say that, like this morning, like I think that's what my youngest son said, was that's what he was grateful for, that his brother made breakfast for everyone. So it reinforces these things that you want in your life. And one of the things I wanted to touch on was gratitude and manifestation, because you said that word too earlier.
Yeah.
And what is that? Well, let me ask you, what does that kind of mean to you?
I'm just trying to think of how to like articulate it, because I remember not having a lot and being grateful then.
Yes.
Right? And then fast forward, I have much,
Yes.
And I should be thankful just the same as I did then. And maybe you can help me with this, but like remembering what that was like, fast forward to today, and always remembering what it was like not to have it. And I find that For me, it's been challenging to remember where you came from sometimes, like
Mm,
remembering not having the bigger space when it comes to your home, or having, being able to go out to nice restaurants, or having a nicer vehicle, like, because for me, it was just like, someday I'm gonna keep working where I'm at, keep working at it, and at some
mm,
point, I don't know how it's gonna manifest, but it's gonna manifest.
hmm. So you
Yeah,
were almost grateful, if I'm hearing you correctly, you were almost grateful for the future that didn't exist, but you knew you were going to have.
correct. I can't say
Hmm.
100% because you don't know 100%. I mean, I didn't
Right.
know 100%, but I just, in looking back, it's like, wow, like, because although I wanted to have a future where I'm at currently, I didn't realize how it was going to happen. I didn't know how it was going to happen, but the
Yeah.
intention was there, right? So go ahead. I
A
feel like
couple
you're
things.
gonna.
Well, a couple things that come to mind from your story are, one, like I was saying earlier, like your brain emphasizes things that you tell it are important. So you were telling yourself like like that is something I'm gonna have. That is something I'm gonna achieve. So you're telling yourself that your brain's gonna start looking for ways to make that
To
happen,
achieve it, right?
to achieve it. Okay, that's one. Two, and this gets into sort of more metaphysical that you can't really prove with science, but that there's so much in this world that I feel
Mm-hmm.
is that is this idea that you know you almost you reverberate a different wavelength of energy when you think that way, when you're grateful versus when you focus on what you don't have and your lack. And
Mm.
right, because so many people in that
Yeah.
situation, they look at things they don't have and they focus on how they want those things, but also that they're like unhappy because they don't have those things. And it's that energy that then like either keeps you there
Oh wow,
in lack,
that's
or
powerful,
puts you
bro.
in a space where you're like,
I want to expand.
I want to
Yeah.
expand. It's the same idea we talk about scarcity versus abundance. Like the scarcity mindset is like that person has this thing and I want this thing and we both can't have it, or whatever goes in someone's head, versus the abundance mindset is like, wow, that thing exists, like then clearly like one can get that in this world, like I'm going to experience that too. And it doesn't have to be physical, it doesn't have to be like material, it could be like what you want in terms of like experiences for yourself in your life, your relationships. You just feel, as I've heard it said, and I now sometimes think about, is like you have gratitude for the future. It's what you just said, actually. It's you have gratitude for the future that you that that you want to exist.
Can I share too? And this is for me huge. What you're saying is like powerful, because if I were to look back, if I were to have a meter of my gratitude and being in that space of gratitude all the time, right? If there's a meter of like your gratitude level daily, I think I was more grateful for living in a fifth wheel trailer and having nothing,
Hmm.
and working three jobs or two
Hmm.
jobs at the time than I do now, which is crazy to
Hmm.
me,
Huh.
right?
Why do you
Because
think that is,
I don't
Poe?
know. I mean, one thing I was grateful, if I be like thinking about it right now, is like I had three kids, so it's five of us in this small space, right? And it felt like we were closer. Like
Hmm.
physically, yeah, we were closer, but there was something about our relationship. I mean, they were little too, but like I just remember just feeling like, yeah, I might not, like, I didn't have anything. I
Hmm.
knew that's not where I wanted to be for the rest of my life. I knew that much, but I felt like, man, like I felt, I don't know. It's hard for me to describe. Like I was telling you earlier about how I felt at one with everything in that time frame. Because at that time I was also caregiving. I was actually taking care of a 92 and a 94-year-old couple, family friends of mine asked
Oh,
if I could help
yeah.
them. And it was there that I also experienced like, man, like we all have that day coming. Every single one of us. So how could I
Yeah.
care for this couple that I would want to be cared for when I'm that age? So
Hmm.
that's that was the space that I was in. And that I realized that like, I was grateful for like the fact that, life is circular, like,
Hmm.
we're born, we have a family, and then we get old. And then the next generation, our kids are born. Now they take care of us. It's like this
Yeah.
circular thing, and that's where I felt like, wow. Cause even my drive was, it was about an hour and a half away, but even the drive I was grateful. Like
Hmm.
even that was like, I was just happy to be, man, it was, I don't know what I was experiencing at that time, but something very, like you said, like, I was like being led. And I've learned that through
Hmm.
the
You're being
years,
led.
like, yeah, like, cause I don't ever think I will, I never thought that I would be doing that type of job ever. Taking care of someone else's family. Like I didn't feel like I was capable of doing it, but I did it. And it was one of the best experiences of my life because I felt like, wow, it was like almost like knowing that, like, man, I'm going to be doing like we all have that date coming when we're elderly,
Hmm.
every
Hmm.
single one of us. I mean, obviously, if we pass early, that's one thing. But for the most part, if you live out to your 90 years old, someone's going to at some point have to help you. And then I started thinking, like, what did this couple do to have me in their space? Because now, and I was just, it was just, man, it was just an interesting time. But to go back to what we were saying, like I just felt like I was way more in a different space at that time than I am today. Now, am I grateful now? Yes, but I feel like my meter then was just
Hmm.
bursting. I was just in a different space, at that time.
Hmm. Well, I think of that energy that what that was creating in your life, what
Yeah,
that was, and how we can harness that. Um, let's talk a little bit about that's something for you to reflect on, Poe. Like,
yeah,
it sounds like it was really powerful when you
yeah.
when you were living more in that space, and maybe how you can bring that back.
This is the first time I actually really dove into the thoughts of it. Things didn't bother me. I didn't worry about stuff, even though I didn't
Mm,
have a lot. You know,
mm,
I felt grateful because I was also working with the elderly. Like
yeah,
here you are. We get to, when you and I get up in the morning, you got to go. You can put your clothes on. You can take a shower by yourself. You do everything independently, right?
yeah,
But when I
right.
would go and spend my weekends at their house, like I literally had to help them get out of
With
bed.
everything.
Yeah. So
Wow.
I think that is what fed into the gratitude and being grateful was like, man, at least, I'm not saying like I felt pity. It wasn't pity. It was almost like I don't know, like a respect, like a reverence that I had for a human life, like, and I knew all the accolades that he had done in his life, through his family. I was able to talk about, who he was as a person, who his wife was as a person growing up. I mean, they walked across the Golden Gate Bridge when it first built. Like I was like, whoa,
Mm,
that was just mind blowing to me because
wow.
I was like, wow, that's pretty cool,
That's
So
pretty cool.
right? So I was just like, man. So, anyways, it's just that I don't know if it was that job. I mean, I don't know if it was just during that time I was experiencing like I don't know. I can't describe it, man. But I felt like I don't know. This is something that we're discussing now. It's very interesting to me. Like I'm able to
Mm.
revisit those thoughts that I had. That was like 10 years ago, 10+ years ago now. So
Well,
it's very
Poe, I'm
interesting.
gonna I'm gonna um I'm gonna pivot for the last part of our conversation just on some practical ways people can implement
Yeah,
kind of a gratitude
totally.
practice, because we've talked a lot about, and from what I'm hearing from you is like that created a really powerful energy in your life, and I think that's the hopefully the takeaway is that it it'll create this sort of vibration in your life, and that what you focus on is what you create more of in your life. What you focus on is what you create more of in your life. You can think of it in the metaphysical terms or just in the terms of like your thoughts. They ultimately dictate how you feel, and how you feel ultimately dictates what you do, how you act. and it's your regular behaviors that create your reality. So, you know, either way you think about it, right, that you get more of what you focus your attention on in your life.
Mm.
So you could do what I do, which is like, this is why I do what I do, Po, by the way. I've tried other methods. Like you can journal, you could do a gratitude journal. That has worked for me in the past. I will keep a notebook next to I found keeping it on my bathroom stand next to like my toothbrush worked well because then I could write in, I'd be reminded to write in it. But I find the accountability with my children very helpful. So, like, if I don't say it, one of them will say it. Usually, one of them will start the practice. So now it's become a regular thing. Now that's just Monday through Friday. But if we go somewhere on the weekend, like I took my son to the grocery store yesterday and we did that practice. So it's just become a little nature. That gets back to how do you actually, so like there's some examples of how you can do it, but it's just setting aside a dedicated time and then being consistent with your practice. You
Mm-hmm.
could do it in your meditation, you could do it on your commute, like you said, and you just have something that prompts you, like put a post-it note on your steering wheel or your windshield just to prompt you to think of, one or two or three things you're grateful for on your drive, and then it'll start to become more of a habit.
Mm-hmm.
You could do it with your prayer, just like you shared in that story, and from your childhood. How
Yeah.
like that gratitude was so much a part of that worship, that prayer service. And I think a lot of people do that. I think a lot of people
Yeah.
use their prayer as a time to reflect on what they're grateful for, and that's a really powerful time
It
to do
is.
that. Yeah. um yeah, so whatever you do, just think about when you're going to do it, like, and just be intentional. So, and if there shouldn't be much barrier to it. Like, if I'm not gonna if I'm not gonna spend 30 minutes journaling about gratitude if I'm not doing that, I don't have time. Or
Right. If you don't
you
have
know
time, just jot down a couple, quick ones,
yeah, or
just to get
say it
into the
out loud
practicing.
with someone.
Yeah.
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 You can do it at the dinner table. That's actually the practice I do in the car was originally taught to me as something you could do at the dinner table. And see how I asked like something you're excited about? The gratitude is not just it. I feel like gratitude is a way to sort of reflect on what's important and meaningful to you in your life. But
Yeah.
there's other ways you can do that. I mean, other ways to think about it. So you could ask, like at the dinner table, you could ask everyone to go around and say, like, what's something what's something that made you laugh today, you know and
Yeah.
so, like, or what's something that touched your heart today. These are kind of prompts or questions that can just get everyone thinking about meaning in their life, like what meaningful things happened today. I like gratitude just because it makes us think of what we appreciated and what
Yeah.
was something kind that you observed today. That, yeah, but just having a regular time and making it intentional in your life
I like that. I
is
like sharing it with a family. That's awesome. And then one other thing is too, like create like a gratitude vision board. I think that's a great idea as well.
mm,
Like,
yeah. Do you tell me about
yes,
that?
yeah. I've got my whole. My daughters have vision boards. I got one myself. Um, man, it's interesting how like that actually manifests when you put the things that you want in your life on that. I think that's a great
Uh,
and that's a good subject. I
oh,
mean, you can actually do
I would
that and
love.
make.
I would next time sometime. I want you to bring your vision board to
Okay,
the
yeah,
health feast. I would love to. Was that something you would show us?
sure, yeah, I totally
Okay.
would. Because I believe in it. I actually believe in vision boards. I think it's because for me, in my experience with them, they actually have worked. I've actually manifested things that I put on there,
Okay.
and I actually share that with my kids. So my daughters, they have their own vision boards that they have. I think that's a great another tool to use too. That you can add to it as well if you have the time, right? To add gratitude vision.
Yeah.
posters or something like that.
That's cool. I love that. I'm excited to see your vision board. All right. Well, that was gratitude, I guess, in a nutshell. I mean, we talked about a lot of things, but hopefully people feel inspired to kind of make some time out of their day. That's what it requires. Yeah. Yeah,
And
I
I
don't
and I
know.
think it's important that like people reflect on what they're grateful for now after listening to this. I'm sure during this
Yeah.
conversation, people were reflecting on what it is that they're grateful for and how that looks in their life. And for those who don't have things that they're grateful for, that's also a possibility too. As some people may, it's
Yeah.
maybe never met in their realm of for them to be grateful for anything. But I
Yeah.
mean,
Some people they don't operate in a place where they're looking for that, or they're focusing
yeah,
on that.
correct. They might be
I hear
focusing on
you.
other things.
Might be focusing on
So,
other things.
well, thank you for today's
Okay.
conversation, Rock. I
No,
appreciate
thank
it.
you, Poe. Appreciate you. Remember, you can find us at thehealthfeast.com. We're at the Health Feast on Instagram and YouTube. And we just appreciate all of you. Our listeners are slowly growing, and we're Poe and I are learning. We're learning
Yeah.
learning how to do this. And
All right,
yeah.
Rock.
Okay, Poe. All right. I'll
All right,
talk to you
everybody.
next
We'll
time.
talk to you
Okay.
later. Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.